Good morning. And I want to welcome you all. First of all, I want to welcome all the staff and faculty and students who are here this morning. As folks were coming in, I thought, okay, the academic advisors are in the house. So thank you so much for being here. Just so you know, and thank you to those of you who are watching the live stream. This is being live streamed for people who aren't able to be here. It is also being recorded, and so at some point after it's taken down and closed captioned and edited a little bit, the recording will be available on the Climate Study website. So probably within the next few weeks, anyone who hasn't been here or who is so enthralled by what we do today that you want to watch it again, it'll be available on the Climate Study website, and that link will be shared with you. It's real tough, climatestudy.wayne.edu. So as we begin, I'd like to invite Provost Keith Whitfield to come up and just say a few words of opening.
You're supposed to clap. Okay, this thing's on now. Thank you. And see, I'm gonna run back and forth and see if they can catch me. So good morning to you all.
Good morning.
That's a little better. Good morning. See, every time I do that, people do better the second time around. I'm glad that you're excited to be here today. I, unfortunately, will not be able to stay the whole time, but I thought that it was critically important that I came over and just shared just a couple of thoughts with you very, very quickly. I have seen this presentation now 5 times. 5 times and seen some of the data, and each time there's actually something new that you can glimmer from the kinds of things that came from the survey. And I think that that's going to continue to go on. Marquita, you have a job. You can keep working on this for a long time. These kinds of things, these kinds of surveys are done at universities all across the country. And I think that it's probably being done at a time when we need to understand and start thinking about the kinds of things that are going on at our universities in terms of climate and culture and what people think and people feel, and more importantly, what they perceive. So forgive me, I'm a psychologist by training. And even though I am your provost, I am still a psychologist at heart. And I couldn't help that as I've seen the data that's coming from this, to think about, one, what we're trying to figure out is how people perceive their environment here, how they see things. And there could be 2 people sitting in the same office, 2 desks apart, and that they perceive their environment completely differently. And so that's one of the reasons why we don't ask just one person, we ask many people. And we try to get different kinds of people to think about, how do you think about what Wayne State culture actually is? Now, as your provost, I get to cover the whole university. And there is always a group, let me try to say this is being recorded so you might remember, there's grumpy people. There's just grumpy people. And then there's other people that feel like they are not a part of the community. And then there are other people who this is the best job they've ever had. Now for me, I fit in the last category. This is the best job that I've ever had. But I also know that some of those grumpy people are because of the culture that exists here. Now the other thing that you have to take into account is that we're changing as a university. This university is moving ahead. And it has to. If we do not, in higher ed today, we run the risk of, let's just say, dying. But as we move forward, it needs to be the kind of place and a kind of campus that you actually want to work at. It needs to be a place where you feel included, where you feel valued. But boy, when you say those things, those are all things that are tough to achieve. One of the things that Marquita has reminded the president, myself, and lots of others about is that once you start seeing this data, you can't unsee it. So some of the people's perceptions, some of the people's feelings, how they see and perceive their position, their work here, the opportunities that they have here, how they interact with others, you can't unsee it. So why do we do this? And if you don't know why, yeah, we want to know, but then what do we do with it? That is the much harder question to be answered. I think that we'll take the first step today and actually find out how people felt. But I can tell you that Marquita has been gently nudging me are already some of the preliminary things that we're finding out and thinking about. Actually, what's funny is that in terms of perception, you're going to see some of that data and you'll perceive it as different. Because sometimes there's ones where something that's less than good is maybe 7%. And that's been interesting. I've been in at least two different meetings, and in one meeting, someone said, well, isn't that great? It's only 7%. And I was in another meeting where somebody said, we've got to do something about that. There are people in that 7% that we need to address. I like both the answers. I'm glad that you're going to see some things that actually show that we do have a positive culture here, but it really depends on how you look at that data. I'm also concerned about the people that do not feel that they are a piece of this university, that they are a part of a culture here. You all contribute. All of you being here right now are going to contribute. The experiences that you have, the incredible introduction that your provost gave to you, you're going to walk back and you're going to talk to somebody about it, and that has an impact. So what we all do is we contribute and create a culture here. It is not just something that's here and you come there and experience it. You are a part of it. You make it what it is. So as you see some of this data, if you see some things that bother you, I would ask that you go back and see if there's a way that you can change it. And if you come up with some good ideas, Marquita would love to hear from you. Actually, I would too. Because that's our responsibility as being a great university, is that we have to contribute to culture. We have to think about the person working next to us. We are a great university by the faculty and staff and students that are here. It's not just because of some building that sits somewhere. It really is the campus climate and the campus culture that we have. So with that, I'm in my professor mode, and so I could talk for another hour, but I want to get out of the way because I want you all to see some of this, and I want you all to have a very lively discussion. I will be watching this, not to see my part because I know that was good, but I'll be watching this because I want to try to see if there are things that I can help contribute to try to make our campus even more inclusive, more welcoming, and a better place to be able to work. You just have to remember, it's work and not fun, but it doesn't mean just because it's work, it can't be fun. So with that, thank you very much. I'll turn it back over to Marquita and have a good informative session this morning.
Thank you, Provost Whitfield. Really appreciate that. Here's Dawn. Thank you. So 2.5 years ago, the provost and president agreed to a proposal that we do this climate study. And so I pitched it and they said yes. And so I convened a group of about 15 or 18 or so faculty and staff and administrators to come together who took on the task and the hard work of helping us understand our campus climate. And so I wonder if the people who are on the campus climate study would stand up or wave your hand or something, because these folks have done a significant amount of work. Thanks to everyone. And I want to, again, thank them for all the work that they did, and because without it, myself as pretty much an office of one might not have been able to get it done. So I want to let you know that this morning we're going to throw a lot of information at you, and so if you have something to write on, so that if you have questions as we go through, we'll hopefully have time at the end to answer some of your questions, so just make sure that you note them as we go through. So I want to bring up, just to start, the importance of diversity and inclusion at Wayne State. So the strategic plan is the framework on which we're doing our planning and execution for 5 years. So we're about halfway through the strategic plan. This is a good time to be doing what we're doing in terms of assessing the climate for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity as a concept is the only theme that runs through the strategic plan, from the mission and vision, which you can see, the values that we hold at Wayne State, which includes things like collaboration and innovation and integrity. And probably most importantly, it's a strategic focus area. So at one point in the strategic planning process a few years ago, diversity and inclusion was not a strategic focus area. It was a value, which it is. It says that we as a university think this is important and we value it. But there were a number of people who thought, if we value it, we need to have it be part of our planning. So the planning piece was really the strategic focus area. So it was then added as a strategic focus area, which means that planning and budgets and personnel and those kinds of things now are focused on diversity and inclusion. So it's been a major piece of important work, and this climate study is about that. So this is the purpose and the goals of the study. As you can see, we really wanted to get your perceptions. We wanted to hear about your experiences. What are the opportunities for advancement and various other things in the climate. But specifically, we wanted to do a couple of things. We wanted to identify what was working. You know, there are things that are working. You know, there are initiatives that are going on around the campus. There are efforts that are underway. So we really wanted to lift up what's working. But we also wanted to uncover the challenges, and that's probably been the biggest part of this survey, and some of our ongoing research will be to uncover what the challenges are to equity and inclusion and accessibility for people on this campus and how they experience the campus. So we wanted to uncover challenges. And the third piece, which will come soon, like right now, as well as on an ongoing basis, is we're going to develop strategies to really address the challenges. And we'll talk a bit more about that in next steps when we talk about what is it that we need to do about what we find out. So that's kind of really where we are at this point. Just so you remember, because the survey was a long time ago, this is the definition of climate that we provided to you at the time. So it's the atmosphere, it's how we perceive it, it's how we live on this campus. That's the environment, that's the climate. Unfortunately, someone shared with me that some of our students thought that it meant the environment, like climate change. And so one of the things that we're learning as we're doing this, and this is our first ever survey, this is our first ever study, is the language that we use to talk about this when we go out and promote it needs to be very clear that it is not about atmospheric climate, it is actually about the culture on the campus community. So just a sense of where we've been then, we decided to partner with an external consultant so that we could in some ways guarantee the integrity of the data. We wanted to be able to assure folks that took the survey that if you take it, we won't be able to figure out who you are, that people would be held in confidence. And so we went with the University of Illinois Chicago Survey Research Lab. Our sister institution, Oakland University, had used them. Baylor University and some other universities had used them to do this work. So we partnered with them. We sat as a committee and worked on questions for the survey. We worked with UIC to pilot test it in the fall of 17. And then in January of 18, we launched the climate study, the climate survey, to the whole campus. And for about a month and a half, people had access to the survey. The other thing I will say is most of the folks who took the survey received a link in their email that was personalized to them. So you got something that said, "Dear Marquita, please take the climate study." We also, though, recognize that on this campus, there are a lot of people who don't sit in front of a computer all day. And so we made the decision and took the effort to distribute paper copies of the survey to some of our custodial, grounds, and parking staff who otherwise would not have access to it. This was our attempt to literally have everyone involved. So we did I think some helpful things to make sure that everybody felt a sense of belonging in taking the study. Since we're talking about belongingness, it makes sense to do it in such a way that everyone feels included. So then we're now in the process then of analyzing the data. We have been in this process for several months. UIC analyzed and generated some reports that we'll have available to you in the next couple of weeks. And then in the summer and spring, summer, we're going to spend some time continuing the analysis. We're just at the tip of the iceberg with this. We'll be doing this for quite a while. But part of what we're also going to be doing is generating themes and issues and ideas for hosting focus groups in the fall, in late summer and early fall. So stay tuned for that. So what I want to do now is introduce Professor Laura-Lee Keishley, who is a professor of communications and an associate dean in the College of Fine Performing and Communication Arts. Laura-Lee and Dr. Lars Johnson, who is here somewhere, did the lion's share of the quantitative analysis. So we had a team working on quantitative analysis. We have a team working on qualitative analysis. We have teams working on everything. So I'm going to turn it over to Laura Lee, who's done a lot of the work on the analysis.
Thanks. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about who did the survey for us. So what you see here is approximately a quarter of our faculty, almost 41% of our staff, and about 12% of our students did this. You may be wondering, how is that? Is that a good rate? Is that typical? This is not unusual for surveys of this nature, but also particularly surveys in which every possible member of the community is permitted the opportunity to do it. Our sister institution, Oakland University, who did a similar survey, they had about the same rate of faculty. They had 30% of their staff, and they had 9% of their students. So we had an elevated involvement from our students and staff. Do want to comment on the staff participation. One of the things that we are aware of, or I'm aware of at Wayne State, and I hope the rest of you are, is that we seem to know a lot about our students. We know a fair amount about our faculty, but we don't know as much about our staff. And they make up the bulk of the working community here at Wayne State. So we wanted to make sure with all our survey respondents, regardless of where they are in the sample, that their voices got a chance to be heard. And so we're going to continue to pursue that. Now, okay, something I want you to, as Marquita said, we're going to be throwing some key data at you, and that's going to be a lot. There's something I'd like to frame it in two ways for you. One is, as you're looking at the data as we show it to you, keep in mind whether you think what you see is acceptable to you as a member of Wayne State. Is this okay? Another question I'd like you to keep in mind is, as you hear this stuff and as it continues to roll through, does it remind you or make you think of actions, initiatives, programs that are happening on campus that will speak to those issues that we're raising here? We have some ideas about that, but we know with a huge campus like this, it's hard to stay in touch with everything. And so that's why we're grateful you're here, because you can help by alerting us to that. And we will have a text poll towards the end of the presentation in which you get to put in some of those specific ideas. Okay? So you ready? Everybody got their seatbelts fastened up? We're going to take it for a ride. All right. Climate. We're going to talk about climate items. We're going to talk about what we call the barometers of connection. And then we're going to talk about two other key areas, hostile and unfair experiences, and also about self-expression. Climate. We asked about climate in two ways. You'll see two bars for each of the samples. The top bar is the responses to the question about climate within your primary unit or department. This is important. People tend to identify most closely with that unit within which they work or they study. The second one has to do with Wayne State's overall climate. So we asked people, what's climate like in your department? And what is it like at Wayne State? And so they indicated all the way from very good to very poor. So we just want you to sit with that for just a moment and be thinking about what you see there and how you're thinking about how that feels for you, what you're learning. And we're going to have a text poll on that, but I want you to sit with this for just a moment and look at the distribution. And as our provost pointed out, data never speaks for itself, we speak for it. So the things that you see in there are really important for all of us to understand. Okay, you ready to take a poll? And the poll's going to ask you what you think about this. Ready?
If you just arrived and you haven't had a chance to enter our poll, you can send a message to 22333 with the message Wayne State Climate.
WSU climate?
But don't answer this quite yet. Let me just pull it up real quick. Thank you for sharing your response.
So go for it. Looks like everybody went in. Okay. So, just let me make. So it looks like by far the majority of the people here in this audience are saying it's not good enough. Right? And that's important for us to know. And a bunch of you are saying, I want more information, which is also really cool. So let's go ahead and give them some more information. Thank you. All of this data we get to keep as well, not by identifying you at all, but we've got it in the system. This is also critical information. So one of the themes you're going to see run through this presentation is that for any of the items on the survey that we're talking about, we wanted to examine how that connected to people's identities, how they identified themselves. For our preliminary analysis, we chose 3 core identities. One is gender expression, the second is race and ethnicity, and the third is disability. Gender and race and ethnicity are very much a part of an organizing principle in our country and have significant meanings and are attached to a number of the programs that we currently have. Disability is very important because universities, for example, over the last several years, have tried to enhance the accessibility, broadly speaking, of the campus for students, faculty, and staff. So it's become a very meaningful identity. And so the question is, how are we doing with that? So when we looked at the 2 items and went by sample, we can see, for example, disability, those people who self-identified on the survey as having a disability are feeling less positive about the climate, whether it's in their department or whether it's at the university. You're going to see that theme run through all of the items. We see with faculty, for example, race, it plays out differently in staff than it does for our students. So for example, African American and Latina staff are less positive on both dimensions. Where for our students, Latino and Latina students are more positive on both dimensions. That's interesting, right? And you might be thinking about, wondering why that might be. It's that kind of thinking about and working hypotheses and questions that we want to have from you. And then women staff in particular, women are less positively feeling about their department climates for our staff. Okay. Here are some examples of some of the qualitative comments. There were opportunities in the survey at various points for people to expand on what their thoughts were or to share other ones. So we have these 2 slides. This first slide has to do with commentary that talked about the more positive aspects of climate and what was related to that. So we see things like diversity of the population was an attraction for a lot of people, that being in Detroit was an important feature as well, and that there were a lot of amazing people on this campus. That's cool. We also know that there are parts of it that feel negative to people, and here's some examples. Part of what we see here is some questions about what do we mean by diversity? What gets encompassed in diversity? For example, political ideology. Do we talk about that? What are people's experiences? Are they being treated in a particular way, not just once, but several times? And then a concern about, we have values and we have a mission, but sometimes the experiences people are having don't map onto that. And that creates a real tension for somebody about who is it, where are we really living, and what is that experience like? Okay. We also asked people about their commitment to diversity, how important it is to you that this university is committed to building a diverse student body, a diverse faculty body, and a diverse staff body. On a scale of 1 to 5, overall, people are essentially saying it is very important. That's good. We have values around diversity and inclusion. We have a strategic focus area around diversity and inclusion. It's infused through our mission and values, and the campus community members are saying this is important, and we think it's really important. Then we asked, so basically, how do you think we're doing? So what are the perceived effectiveness of recruitment efforts and also of retention efforts? And you can see it's still pretty decent, around moderately, but it is lower than the values that people were placing on really important. So I think it shows us that we've got room to grow. We have opportunities here. We have a community that embraces diversity and inclusion and wants us to do more, be more supportive, and to continue to develop ourselves as an inclusive institution. Now I'm going to talk about the barometers of connection. This is a phrase we use we're referring to some of the other indicators that often lots of organizations will use to get a sense of the pulse of what's happening with their folks in their institutions. And it can be used as a flag to them to say, is there something more we need to look at here? If it's extraordinarily low or it's high, it says we need to look at that. Why is that happening? So it signals us that there's places we need to go to. So we're going to talk about several of them. The first one is we ask people about belonging. That's really belongingness. You heard the provost talk about it. You heard Marquita talk about it. Belongingness is a very strong part of our narrative here at Wayne State. For students, faculty, and staff, we want people to feel that they belong here. So here's the distribution of responses from our survey participants. Again, as you look at that, think, does that feel okay to you, what you see? And if it doesn't, then we have to be able to talk about that. Okay, you got that one in your head? I'll show you another one. Another indicator we can come at is to ask people how happy they are to be a faculty member, a staff member, or a student here at Wayne State. Right, this is not about general life happiness. This is very specific to the roles that people occupy on this campus. And so we see a distribution where by far the majority of people are saying they're moderately happy or higher. There's a noticeable portion, 10 to 12%, who are saying no, not really. Have to think about that too. Why might we think that happens? And as I anticipated, we're going to go through the identity group differences, and you'll see some patterns happening there. Respect. To what extent do you feel, in the case of faculty, we use the word colleagues. In the case of staff, we use the word coworkers. And in the case of students, we threw it open and said others on campus. Treat you with respect. Respect has become a term that is used a lot on campuses, often connected to civility, right? And people want to feel treated with respect. And it appears that people, for the most part, are feeling yes. There's some who are not, though, right? Another key indicator organizations often ask is about job satisfaction. We asked about this in two ways of our faculty and staff. We asked about satisfaction with your current job, and then we asked about satisfaction with your opportunities for career development. I think it's important we asked that second question in contrast to the first. Because what we see, or what I see in that, is that there are a notable proportion of people who are saying, I'm feeling like I'm not getting the opportunities I want. That could be for a couple of reasons. One is maybe there aren't a lot of opportunities here at Wayne State. Second could be that people feel that they're not being given an opportunity to access it. So there are opportunities, but maybe they're being passed over for it, don't know about it, have not been given serious consideration. I get excited about that because for me what it says is that the people who are responding to our survey care about doing more here and being more here. So for me, this is an area where we could really do some profound work. Right? We have people, faculty and staff, who say they want to be more, they want to grow, and they want to grow here. Another classic thing we ask in a lot of surveys of organizations is intent to leave. So we asked people, and we also have data on this for students, so you're going to see it. For our faculty and staff, we asked in the past 12 months, have you seriously considered leaving Wayne State? Now, we use the word seriously considered because I don't know about you, but every once in a while I have a day where I go, I am done. Somebody would ask me, are you considering leaving at this moment? Yes. Seriously considering it? No. So we wanted to frame that for people about seriously considering leaving. Let me tell you, these rates are high. One of our sister institutions, Grand Valley State, asked this question of their faculty and staff, and it was sitting at about 20%. That's important for us to be thinking about, right? So, and looking at some of the reasons. People were provided with a variety of reasons and asked, what's that about? And we've just highlighted a few of them having to do with salary, job insecurity, for example, types of responsibilities. Something that's interesting is looking in the staff column that we see fairly large percentages in just about every reason. So there's something there that tells us, for both our faculty and staff, that there are things that are motivating this. And are they things that we can take on or we can dig into and try to understand it some more? For our students, approximately 16% have said they considered leaving in the last 12 months, seriously considered leaving. As a benchmark or a possible comparison, Grand Valley State asked that of their students, and their rate was less than 10%. Something for us to think about. A couple of big reasons: financial, which I see many of you nod your head and say, yeah, because that's part of a broader conversation we're having at Wayne State, but also in higher ed, the cost of higher ed. Another one is dissatisfaction with academic program. So that could be due to a number of different things, right? It's always interesting to me when we went and presented to different groups, how they would interpret that. So one group we gave it to said, well, that's probably because the students weren't doing well in the program, they got a bad GPA, they feel bad. Somebody else said, no, sometimes the fit isn't there. This is not what I expected. So clearly that's another thing we want to dig into, right? So let's talk about the three main identity groups we looked at. We see that gender now shows up fairly consistently across. With faculty, women were less positive in terms of feeling they were treated with respect, and also less satisfied with their career opportunities. In staff, let me say, when we did the survey and we asked people about gender expression, we had male, female, transgender, and then another category. We had nobody in the faculty and staff survey samples identify as transgender. We did have students in the sample identify as transgender. So that's why you're not seeing transgender necessarily show up for faculty and staff, because we didn't have anybody who self-identified. Doesn't mean it's not an issue. Just know that the data wasn't there. So in the case of students, transgender, and those who identified as other than binary, were less positive. I bet they felt less happy. They felt that they were less likely treated with respect. And in the case of other, which is a huge category, they had greater intention to leave. A greater proportion of them were intending to leave. With race and ethnicity, we see in staff, African American staff feel less positive with regard to being treated with respect. Again, that's a huge initiative, phrase, experience we have on this campus. We saw from the overall samples that people wanted to be treated with respect, and we have members of our community who feel that they are not treated with the same kind of respect. And in terms of students, Latino, Latina, those who identified as multiracial, and there was also an unknown category that people chose to put themselves into. Greater proportion of those groups were seriously intending to leave. And then disability, all across the board, all across all samples, all items. Right? So if we can use the language of flags, we've got a number of flags going on here that are telling us that there are groups of people who do not feel as connected or as treated in as positive a way as others are. Okay, check my time. I'm doing good? Okay. The next two set of data have to do, this set has to do with hostile and unfair experiences, and then we're going to do one more set around self-expression, and then we're going to summarize what the data, where we are with the data now, and then we're going to turn it back over to Marquita to talk about suggested actions. So let's talk about hostile and unfair experiences. We asked people two questions. We gave them 8 different kinds of behaviors, and asked if they had, in the last 12 months, how often have they witnessed these behaviors. And they had a scale ranging all the way from not at all to moderately to often to very often. The one that I want to draw your attention to is the overall metric at the bottom. That is based on the idea of identifying who endorsed at least one of these types of behaviors, at least moderately often. And we see that about 30% of our faculty, a third of our staff, and 30% of our students are saying they've seen stuff happen on this campus. Larger rates are around bullying and exclusion, and microaggressions being a big one. How do you feel about that one? I don't have a text poll for you. You can just go, how do you feel about that one? Yeah, okay, we got it that. One of the ways I can tell you how I feel about it, and let me finish my thought before you all freak out, I'm excited about it. I'm excited because it means people see things happening. It means that they are aware of things happening. And the question is, what are they doing with that? But from my perspective, there is a set of opportunities there that if people feel they can't do something, but they see something, maybe there's ways we can build up the confidence and the skill and the efficacy to do that. It was like what Provost, whatever that guy's name, Provost Whitfield said. Yeah, you be up here talking to 150 people, see how you do. And he talked about culture and climate is made up by the people who are here, and that we manifest it and we change it and we influence it. Just think of the power of when you have seen something and taking some kind of action to address that. It's a statement about where you're coming from. It's a statement about who we are as an institution. So I'm excited. We also asked people if they experienced it. We use the metric in the same way. Those percentages at the lower level represent those people who said they experienced at least one of these types of behaviors, at least moderately often to more, in the last 12 months. 16% of our faculty, 20% of our staff, and 11% of our students said yes, they have. In terms of comparable data, we do see similar kinds of things at some other institutions, but still, that's high. Or you have to decide if it's high. So people have these experiences. We have mechanisms on campus, so we ask people, what are you aware of? What do you know? Are you aware that there are university-level units that you could go and take these things to, these experiences that you have? And these are the responses that we got. I know, I want you all to yell out what it is. For me, and I'm going to own it, for me, I am captivated by the percentage of people who were unsure. They don't know about them, or they're not sure about them. That has profound implications for us as an institution. Because if we're relying on reports coming through our formal units, and we as a community don't even know about them or don't know to take them there, then the picture that the university develops about what its issues are is distorted. Right? So that's a huge problem. And it's consistent across all of our sample. So we also wanted to ask people, okay, there are these units. If you had an issue, how confident are you that you could bring it forward without fear of negative consequences? Because that's important. Awareness of where to go is important, but also having a sense that if I go there, I'm going to be okay. I'm not going to be retaliated against, somebody will listen to me, something will happen. What we see here is a notable percentage of our population, approximately 30% of our faculty, 30% of our staff, and 20% of our students don't feel confident. Again, they may know where to go, but they're concerned about taking it. Again, then as an institution, what do we know? And how do we understand that? We asked, going to the primary unit of identification, the department, if you are aware or feel you're knowledgeable enough about things that go on in your department, How do you feel your department has dealt with issues that are related to diversity? What we see is, the majority of people are saying it's being handled. We're getting some kind of good action out of it. There's a percentage of people who are saying, it's not. I kind of put all these things together and say, people aren't always sure where they have to go. Some of us are worried that if we do take it somewhere, we'll have a negative consequence. Those people who do take it within their own department have a relatively positive experience. Something happens that feels better about it, but we have that disconnect, right? We have to do something about that disconnect. We have to do something about that lack of knowledge. Just give you some qualitative comments about people's attitudes towards the official reports. And you can see that people are saying things like, I don't know where to go. I put something out there, and I don't hear about it again. I don't know. The loop hasn't been closed for me. And maybe some of the stuff that's happening on campus, we really don't have an understanding or a mechanism for dealing with it. Again, it is not in our best interest, well, I'm going to say it. It is not in our best interest as an institution not to know what's going on with the people on our campus. And we have evidence from members of our campus that they don't feel confident or knowledgeable about where to take things. That's important. So, identity group differences, you're coming to expect that there would be, right? With gender, across all samples, and faculty, women witness more. They have a less positive sense that the department is addressing it appropriately. Staff, women are witnessing and experiencing more. And in the case of our students, those who identify as transgender and other than binary are witnessing and experiencing more. And also women are, and they're feeling less positive. Right? When we see with race, African Americans faculty are less positive that the department is addressing things in appropriate ways. For our staff, Latino, Latina, and our African Americans are saying they witness more, and African Americans are saying they experience more, and that they feel that departments are less positive about how departments are addressing those issues. And then for our students, a race that African Americans are less positive, Unfairness, and then we have that relatively large category of unknown who are saying that they witness more, they see things. So we know that people see things, we know that they experience things, and then disability. Disability, again, you see the same pattern showing no matter what question we ask or how we ask it, those people who self-identify as being disabled are having more opportunities to witness and experience and feeling less positive about how things are being addressed. Okay, we're almost there. Self-expression, university campus, free speech, opportunities to develop yourself fully. We wanted to ask those questions. And we wanted to thank President Wilson for making sure that we did ask questions about freedom of speech. So we asked it in two ways. One is, how important do you believe that freedom of speech is? And then we asked, how important is it even when it's directed at certain groups? Interesting, huh? With the strong belief in freedom of speech, notice that nobody in our samples said not at all. We had nobody endorse not at all. So very, very powerful value, things that people care about. It got more challenging for people thinking about free speech being directed at certain groups of people. And so now we see much larger proportions all across our samples saying, that's a situation where we have to work on that. So that might be issues about interpretations of hate speech, whether speech is being done in a free and responsible manner. But that's very powerful. The contrast there is extremely powerful. We also ask people how comfortable they feel in your own work environment. So again, identifying that department unit identification and how comfortable are you. And you see that relatively speaking, people are feeling, yeah. Then we asked, How do you feel about expressing your personal beliefs and thoughts? Again, as an institution, we want to be able to encourage people to be fully themselves in this place. And it got moderated a little bit. And then we threw in the next condition. How comfortable are you expressing your beliefs even if do not appear to be consistent with what other people believe or think, and that people are becoming less comfortable? So, I mean, one comment to make is being uncomfortable is not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because sometimes that's how we grow. But the question is, are these degrees of discomfort or less comfort ones that become problematic for us? We also asked people, what kinds of things have you been doing? And how often have you engaged in activities around diversity? Now, just let me put a condition on this. When you ask somebody how often, you're presuming they have the opportunity, right? So maybe some people never had the opportunity. Although I think we're an interesting, vibrant, and diverse campus, I suspect there were lots of opportunities, and our witnessing data says, yeah, there were. So as we go from being aware of your worldview, we see people going, yeah, yep, I've become more aware, or I'm being more aware. Step it up a little bit, reaching out from your head and saying, now I'm going to get to know people who are different than me. People are going, okay. And now we ratchet up again. Now we want people are talking about being active in educating on issues of diversity. And we see that people's engagement has dropped. Faculty are interesting. They're higher than the other two. Could be considered part of our jobs, right? We like the word educate, we can do that. And then bump it up one more time. Now, how often have you challenged other people on issues of discrimination? And now we see less opportunities for that. People saying, no, I'm not doing that. So the more you're out there, the more you make yourself visible, the more you take on a position, the tougher it becomes for you. And that may be why people are engaging less. So, identity group, you've come to see this one. With freedom of speech, the item regarding certain groups across all samples, women, we're moderating. Now, when it says less important, they're not saying, no, it's not important. They're moderating that value of importance on that. And those who identify as transgender are also moderating. In terms of comfort, we see that with the immediate environment, those who identify as transgender and others in binary, and those who identify as disabled feel less comfortable. Personal beliefs, women faculty, and those who identify as disabled feels less comfortable. Personal beliefs not consistent, now we have a lot of people feeling less comfortable. Women students, faculty and students who identify as Asian, white staff and students, staff who identify with disabilities, students who identify with disabilities. So again, identity group is shaping and conditioning what people's experiences and perceptions are like. And in the engaging one, diversity, where we had the four indicators, consistently, men, those who identified as Asian, and those who identified as not having a disability engaged less. Interesting, right? Interesting. So, to this point, what is it that we know? Well, we know that diversity is an important value for our institution. We saw that so strongly, that this was important. We've also seen that people's identities and their role on campus, by role I mean student, faculty, and staff, influence people's experiences and perceptions. That there's the idea about freedom of speech, freedom and responsible speech, and how that's different or connected to hate speech. And as an institution, I think we're well structured and have a commitment in our mission and values to be able to create the opportunities to have these conversations, to try to work through this with each other, recognizing these are challenging. The examination of incident reporting and response mechanisms. What did we hear clearly in some of this data? I'm not sure where to go. If I do, some of us are going, I don't know if I'm not going to get some negative consequences of this. And I also want to emphasize the word opportunities. Take you back to the witnessing data. People see things. What are they doing? And how can we help people do things in a constructive way that could fundamentally change how those things happen and how people feel? So overall, our campus climate is positive and welcoming for some, but not for others. And we need to make significant improvement, and it's going to require input, effort, real activity, and commitment from the entire campus community to do this work. You with me? All right, let's do that again. I'll do the provost. I'm channeling the provost here. Are you with me? Yes. All right, and now I'm going to turn it over to Marquita.
Thanks, Laura Lee. As I said, that's a lot. So I'm sure that some heads are spinning and your minds are full of data. But one of the things that we did was we asked several open-ended questions. And one of the open-ended questions was, what actions should the university take to address these issues? And so it was a qualitative piece, so our qualitative team was actively looking at the themes that emerged, and these are some of the themes that emerged. One of them was a real need for what they call diversity training, okay? So that there needs to be university-wide diversity educational programming that enhances the cultural awareness of the people on our staff around a variety of identities. And so that piece came through loud and clear from students, staff, and faculty who answered this qualitatively. Ongoing opportunities for dialogue. You know, we have dialogues periodically on the campus. Usually they're in response to something. There's a real hunger on the part of the campus community for ongoing opportunities to have dialogue around these issues, so that we build our muscles of better understanding what the issues are and how we might choose to address them. Enhanced recruitment and retention for diversity. Diversity is important. You remember the question about how people thought we were doing in terms of our overall recruitment and retention of diverse people from diverse backgrounds. There was a feeling that we need to do more and we need to do better, and that some of that means that we look at the processes by which we do searches, and that we're just more inclusive in the pools, and that we're being much more intentional about how we recruit for diversity. Likewise, retention. So retention is a very important piece too. When you noticed intent to leave, there's a lot of stuff in there that says there is stuff that we need to be doing better so that people don't want to leave. And that people are in fact choosing to leave because there are things in their environment that they're not happy about. So those are some of the pieces that we need to work on. Policies and practices really begin to get at how we deal with harassment and bullying and some of those things. You know, are there mechanisms in place to adequately respond to those things when they happen? And that actually is a little bit connected to reporting, and I'll talk about that in a second. But also, how do we, there was the piece about people feeling like there were not opportunities for advancement. So how do we make sure that in our policies we're making opportunities known and we're making the staff aware that those opportunities are out there? So what are the policies and practices that we have that may create barriers to people being able to have access to opportunities on our campus? And then the reporting and response piece came through loud and clear, both in terms of there's just a need for people to be able to report, not just to report what's happening, but that there is a university response. And so what was clear to us from this was we've got a whole lot more work to do, especially for staff and faculty. For students, there's the care report, right? There's an opportunity to say that students may be having behavioral issues, there may be challenges, there may be facing discrimination. Then they provide care reports that help them then be addressed by the Dean of Students office and the behavioral intervention team. There are mechanisms for students to be able to report what's happening to them or to be reported upon, but then something happens. We need to have an alternative process for staff and faculty, and that piece, again, as I said, came through loud and clear. So we've got a lot of work to do in that area. So what does that mean then? What are the next steps for this whole thing that we've got going on? One of the most important steps is forming action teams. You know, all of this data and information is really interesting, and we could just say, wow, isn't that interesting? People have an intent to leave, and then not do something about it. And so we'll be forming action teams as we continue to identify those areas where work needs to happen. We'll beginning to mobilize action teams to begin to figure out how to understand more about the problem, how to develop strategies for addressing the problem, and then how to create teams of folks, faculty, staff, and students across campus to begin to help us resolve the issues that we're currently identifying. That's going to require building coalitions across the campus, across units, across colleges, you know, not staying in our silos, but really, really coming together as a university community to address some of these issues. And so those action teams are going to require that we all start coming together and mutually resolving these issues. Then, of course, we're going to continue gathering information, right? So one of the things that we do want to do is there are places where reporting is a process. The Office of Equal Opportunity is a good example where they collect complaints. Office of Internal Audit collects complaints. So what we want to do is see from their annual reports how many complaints they're getting, what happens to them when they get them. And so part of our fact finding will be just gathering information about those offices that are already doing things along those lines. We also know that there's stuff happening. There's all kinds of good things happening around equity and inclusion, a lot of educational programs, a lot of initiatives that colleges have, that units have. We need to understand more about what those are. And so as Laura Lee mentioned a while ago, as you hear the data, you may be aware of something happening in your unit or in your college where you're actually looking at that particular issue, but the rest of the university doesn't know about that. So we're going to spend some time trying to surface those initiatives that help us figure out, wow, there's some really good things going on. How do we replicate those across other units? Based on the information that, the other thing I want to say is, it's really important that we have those conversations because what we have now is a system of fragmented and ad hoc programming that addresses issues in a particular unit, but the rest of the campus is not addressing those particular issues. So what we want to do in building coalitions is to build a cohesive strategy across the university for taking on what we're learning. So it's really important, you know, everyone talks about silos. It really is going to be important that we work collaboratively across units to build a cohesive, comprehensive strategy for dealing with some of these issues. And then one of the more important additional data gathering pieces that we'll do is based on the information that emerges from the survey. And remember, this is a climate study, not just a climate survey. So there are a number of parts to this that are part of us helping understand more about our climate, is creating focus groups. So we'll get some data that say, and we've already seen from some of the identity group information that Laura Lee shared, my guess is we'll want to do focus groups with folks who identify as disabled because their information showed up throughout the whole process. So we'll do a variety of focus groups with students, staff, and faculty. Some of it will be around issue. Some of it will be around identity, depending on how they showed up. So stay tuned for that because some of you may decide that you want to be involved in a focus group and we'll talk about getting involved, more involvement in a minute. We did leader interviews, so we interviewed the provost, the president, all the vice presidents, all the deans, some faculty leaders, because we wanted to hear from them what their perspectives were on diversity and inclusion. And so we have hour-long interviews that have been transcribed and just starting to look at those questions to get a sense of what the themes are in terms of what their issues and concerns are. We asked, one of my favorite questions is we asked all the leaders, what would break your heart from learning about this data? And I think there's some data in here that is heartbreaking or that could be. And so that was one of the questions that we asked of leaders. One of the things that leaders said was, I want to make sure that we do something about this. It would break my heart if we did all this work and we don't do anything about it. So I had to remind them that they were the ones that would have to do something, do something about it. So, and then lastly, institutional data. We collect a lot of data around here, and it's in IR, in this big vat of untapped data. And so we really have a lot of opportunity just from the data that we collect to understand more about hiring patterns and pay and recruitment and retention of faculty, staff, and students. And so we can learn a lot just by looking at our data that's been collected over, decades. So we can do some longitudinal stuff to learn a little bit more about what's going on. So the process, though, isn't over, okay? We're just beginning, and so part of this is going to require some help from you. And so one of the things that I'm going to ask you is, we're going to ask a text poll question now that asks you, what are some suggestions that you have for further action? Now, a couple of things you need to know about the text poll. Once you hit submit, you can't go back and add. So you have to think about what you want to say and then hit submit. The other thing is, this is data. We'll actually use your suggestions as part of our thought about what suggestions action may happen. And so the other thing is, this question I think will be open for a while. And so if you decide you can't think about it right now and you want to think about it some more, I think it's open for like 24 hours. So you may go home and have lunch and say, oh, now I know what I suggest. So you also have the opportunity to do that later. So we're going to collect this. We're not going to look at it right now because if you're like me, you're still going. I know most of you are not like me. You use your thumbs and all that. So for more information about this, we encourage you to go to climatestudy.wayne.edu. Now, there's a link there for getting involved. And so I'm hoping that you'll click on that link, you'll give us your name and say, here's how I want to be involved. And that's the question, how do I want to be involved? I want to help be on an action team. If you know the issue that you really want to work on, put that in there so we have a sense of that. I really want to be on a focus group. It's an open-ended box, so please feel free to use that space to let us know how you want to get involved. The other piece is, this is not the last town hall we're going to do, so there's a lot of information. There's a lot you're going to want to know about what actions are we're undertaking, so you're going to want to hear from us again about what the university is doing, and we want to make sure that we're keeping this information in front of you. The last thing I want to say is, you have an opportunity on your chair, some of you, to get a little button that says Building Inclusive Community. Part of what I want to ask all of us is, it's not the responsibility of one or two offices or 2 or 3 individuals to make this place a safe, a welcoming, and inclusive campus community. It's all of our responsibilities. And so by taking this pin, you're saying, I'm one of the people that's going to help build inclusive community. So with that, we have time for questions. We're done. Oh, you got to push and hold. That's something that we haven't looked at yet. We will have that. How many people fill out paper surveys? Yeah, we don't know yet. There you
Yes,
go.
hi. Could you speak to the lack of Middle Eastern and Muslim identity in this survey data? They did not come up once.
Am I on? They are in the data because we included an item in the survey that had people self-identify their race and ethnicity, and we put in Middle Eastern because it's not part of the census data or whatever. In the analysis that you saw here, those who identified as Middle Eastern or North African were not showing as significantly different in their experience on those items. But there are other items that we're starting to look at where they do. So that, excuse me, that information we are looking at. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Hi, Marquita. This is a great job. I think there's probably lots of good data that we can be proud of in this survey, but we really going to have a hard time understanding that unless we try to benchmark our results against what we would call peer institutions. Is there a plan to do that? And are there a few areas right now we can stand up and cheer saying we're really doing well?
That's a good question. I'm not sure that I'd say that there are tons of places where we can stand up and say that we're really doing well, except that we're addressing head-on the things that we're learning about. So that's part of it. We are doing some benchmarking with sister institutions here in Michigan. We'll also do some looking at some of our peer urban institutions that are out there. Different people use different surveys, so in some ways it's like comparing apples and oranges, but where there are common questions that we can glean something from, then we'll have a better sense of what other people are doing. The other thing about this is our first of these. And so it's really our baseline that then everything else that we do here will build off of that. So in about 3 or 4 years when we do another one of these, we'll hope to see some improvement and some change in what we're doing. So yes, we're looking at some of our sister institutions. We'll probably look at some of the urban 21 or however many of them there are to get a better sense of where we stand. And so right now we're looking, we're seeing some things that are, yes, this is good. I think more, I guess I'm kind of zeroed in on where we need to do the work. So I think we probably need to dig up some more positive stuff. But for this purposes, we wanted to just let folks know we really need some work and we really need some help for that.
Hi, Marquita, Laura Lee, thank you both. As with the question for our Middle Eastern and Muslim students, I didn't see any demographic representation for service members or veterans. Was that included in this?
We also have that data.
Okay.
Yeah, we also have that data.
Thank you.
And actually, if we have an infographic on the website that describes what the samples look like. I will double check to see if we've got the, we do have the racial demographic, racial ethnicity demographic on there as well, but we can also develop it for the veterans and other categories. We have it for religion. We have it for political ideology. We have a lot of the different ones. So if there's specific questions that you have, make sure you let us know.
Hello, I'm Theoresa. I'm an assistant professor in the College of Education, and I have a disability, and it's so interesting in your data, the representation dissatisfaction throughout all the data that you collected. I'm curious, as a person with disabilities, if you have gone through the archival of Wayne State University, because I was looking at some of the histories in 1956, seems like there were great investment in people with disabilities. So I'm interested in that trajectory. What happened in between that all of a sudden, right now we have negative views among people with disabilities when Wayne State actually, by 1956, even without the establishment of disability laws, already there were initiatives to create a climate which is inclusive.
That's fascinating. We need to look back through our own histories to learn more about that. It's been interesting I've been here 4 years now, it's been interesting to learn so many ways in which Wayne State was a leader, where we now have ceded that leadership to other places. And so I think we have some real opportunities to become a leader again in some of these areas that we're learning about, and being an advocate in accessibility would be one that we have some real opportunities for. Thank you.
Hi. In looking at some of the breakdowns of how certain populations and students, faculty, and staff were feeling, is there information that breaks that down by age? So as we consider the generations in the workplace, the different types of student ages that represent those groups, was there a breakdown of that may show that certain generations feel certain things?
Right. We do have data on age for every sample. We haven't looked into it yet. But this has come up before. It was raised when we spoke to the Student Senate. They also brought that up and said, hey, what about age? Range, they're talking from the student perspective, the range across there, and whether we might see some differences there as well. So this is being added, and look at that.
Qualitatively, I know some people have said some things.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, somebody there and then there.
Hello? Oh, hi.
Hi.
As a student here at Wayne, it's very interesting to see this data presented in this way. I was just wondering if there was any intent to sort of bridge the gap between these experiences between these groups, because noticing and seeing the faculty and the staff data and the student data separately, I was just wondering if there was any sort of going to be, I guess, a movement or a not really coalition, but I guess an intent from you all to bridge those experiences to, I guess, heighten the diversal inclusion in some way?
I mean, I think part of what you're pointing to in my mind is as we construct action teams, as we construct focus groups, as we construct some of these different groups that we're going to be bringing together, especially the action teams, that those action teams represent the full demographic range of our staff, faculty, and students, because there are a lot of areas of common interest that I think we need to be working together on. So I think that's the main place where you're going to see that.
I was also wondering regarding the faculty, if you've looked at it separately yet for full-time versus part-time instructors, lecturers,
Yes.
and those groups.
Yes, we did. Yeah, and we shared some of that data with the Academic Senate and also with the Faculty Affairs Committee. Yeah. And one of the things is part-time faculty often feel less connected. They also are more dissatisfied with their career opportunities. And across the different categories of faculty, actually rank was not connected to any one of those, but whether you were non-tenure track, tenured, or tenure track were. And in interesting ways for experiencing hostile behavior, tenured and tenure track faculty experienced it at higher rates than did lecturers, non-tenure track, and part-time faculty. Yeah, so there's interesting things about exposure, right? But yeah.
Yeah, one of the things about having this much data is that you can slice it and dice it so many ways. And so part of the way that we'll continue with this work going forward is what we hear from you.
Right.
And so some of the questions are things we've asked, a lot of things are things that we ask. And so what we hear from you will help continue to drive how we look at the data. We have a lot of demographic data, so being able to cut across different, we can slice the data in lots of ways. And so as we hear from you, as we get more themes from the qualitative, because that data analysis is ongoing, then we'll begin to put together focus groups and action teams that are related to those things that we learn.
Let me just make one observation. Any of you who work with survey data or who are into statistics and whatnot, recognize that you need to be cautious about going on fishing expeditions. So we need to have solid rationale for why we would want to investigate something, because you can take data and divide it a number of ways and end up, for those of you who love this stuff, inflating your type 1 error, right? So we want to be cautious to make sure that we're using appropriate procedures so that what we find is reliable and not just a result of having accidentally inflated sensitivity when it wasn't there. Yep.
Hi. So Wayne State is highly unionized, and I'm wondering if there's going to be any efforts to reach out to the bargaining units, because there are certain rules and regulations in terms of hiring practices and promotion that may prohibit us from being more diverse.
I mean, I think that's a given that we have to be mindful of all the different rules as we're doing this. But I think the part of the process is how can we be, even given those rules, how can we be supportive of within the confines of that particular contract? How can we help people be as inclusive as possible? So I think it's really about, it's not about mandating anything as much as it is about providing resources and support so that if people really want to be more inclusive in their hiring, they're able to do it. So to make it easier rather than something that we're going to say, this is what you must do. So it's really about being supportive. Yeah. Yes. Right behind you.
I noticed on the site that 62% of the respondents were white. Was there any discussion on how that may have skewed the data, and would there be a breakdown of how the response rate amongst the ethnicities for students?
Yeah, actually, one of the things that I didn't comment on when I talked about the sample is we did compare the sample that we received to what we know about our population at that time. And they were very closely matched. There were some differences in proportionality. So what the Survey Research Lab did was do what we call weighting on key demographics. so that what we talk about from the sample is reflective, more likely to be reflective about the population. You're also, though, raising the question is if within different groups we saw different levels of response rate, and we can get that information. Yeah. Cool.
Any other questions that occur to you after the fact?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if there's a link to ask a question. diversity@wayne.edu is an email address you can use to get questions to me. But also please use the link on the Get Involved piece just to let us know how you want to be involved. Beyond that, I thank my colleague and I thank all the colleagues on the climate study and thank you all so much for being here.
Yeah.